Welcome back to the Flow Performance Podcast. My name is Ricky Dan, founder of Flow Nutrition and your host. On today's episode, we chat with one of Surfing Australia's strength and conditioning coaches, Cohen Crispin. Cohen is a level 2 professional S&C coach and exercise scientist who has previously worked in the NRL, including as a sports scientist for the Queensland Maroons, and is currently working at Surfing Australia with a variety of athletes from state level right through to the championship tour. Cohen's knowledge around physical preparation is incredibly valuable for anyone wanting to implement an evidence-based approach to their training. And I am super grateful for the opportunity to pick his brains and share some of his wisdom with you all. In this episode, Cohen answers the question, what's the go with physical preparation for surfing? We discuss the physical characteristics of surfing, foundation movement patterns that we all should be doing, how to improve our conditioning, flexibility and mobility training, and essentially just how to nail the basics as a whole. We cover so many components of training here, and Cohen provides an incredible amount of value, so I'd strongly suggest getting ready to take some notes. If you do find this valuable, don't hesitate to share it with a mate or post it up on your Instagram story and tag the Flow Performance Podcast. So let's get stuck into it. Here is a chat with Surfing Australia's strength and conditioning coach, Cohen Crispin.
3, 2, 1,
Welcome back to the Flow Performance Podcast. My name is Ricky Dan, founder of Flow Nutrition. And today I'm in Currumbin with one of Surfing Australia's strength and conditioning coaches, Cohen Crispin. Mate, thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. So we'll dive straight into today's training-related question, which is, what's the go with nailing the basics of physical training for surfing? Now, this might be a bit of a long episode. We try and stick to around 10 minutes, but I feel like there is quite a lot to cover in this one. So for a little bit of context here, I think we're going to be talking about training specifically to improve your surfing performance. Like, I'm a surfer, but when I go to the gym, I'm not going to lie, I train for just hypertrophy. I want to get a little bit of size and retain some muscle mass. But for this case, we'll just talk about trying to improve surfing performance. So I guess the place to start is probably, what are the physical characteristics that are important for surfing to sort of start with?
Yeah, so if I think about physical characteristics that are really important, I sort of lend myself to going to benchmarking within a sport. So there's some key movements that are really important. So for me, a squat pattern, surfing's quite knee dominant. You want a nice upright position. So being able to have some good squat numbers. Another key exercise for me is sort of a pull-up. So we know our pull-ups related to sprint paddling, being able to get into waves sort of faster. So having some good strength numbers on that's going to be really important. And then how fast we can produce force, how reactive we are. So I go to a counter movement jump. So exercises like this are really important when I think about nailing the basics and guiding the direction of what we do in the gym. So when I start to sort of build out my foundations of nailing the basics for strength and power, I sort of lend myself to our key movement patterns. So squat, hinge, split leg, the single leg variations for that. In surfing, we've got a lot of frontal plane contribution, so how well can we move laterally? So a lateral squat, a lateral lunge, things like this are really important. The upper body, for our key movement patterns, we want to be able to press and pull in the vertical, horizontal plane of motion, good control around our core. So when I think about building out the basics, it's very similar to how I build out the basics in another sport. Like if I'm thinking rugby league, team sports, things like that, things are very similar. But when we come back to that benchmark, where we're trying to go with our program, what success looks like is a little bit different. So surfing, it's not quite as force dominant. So what we're trying to achieve from our back squat or our front squat is not going to be quite as high as if we were playing footy on the weekends and we're trying to overcome someone else. So yeah, that's really important for me.
That's fantastic. And you just touched on those key foundation movements there, particularly like the squat and hinge and your pull-ups. They're big sort of compound movements. What are your thoughts on, and I get this question a lot, like what's the difference between doing single leg stuff versus double leg? Because there's an unlimited amount of variations, right, with your squat and dead movement pattern, but then you can do all sorts of split lunges. And so would you suggest the program should predominantly be double leg stuff and then do some single leg, or what's your thoughts there?
Well, when I think about, so the goal of a strength and power program is, we want to produce a lot of force. So I might have one of my key exercises at the start of a session being a squat or a deadlift because I know I can load them up really well. I can progressively overload them, add weight, session to session. So it's a really good exercise if our goal is producing force. Now, the nature of surfing, it doesn't happen in a squat stance. It's a split leg. So we want to ensure that we can produce force in different angles, everything like that. So for me, it starts off with a key compound lift, typically a squat or a deadlift. As we go into sort of our second block or our third block, we want to be doing some split leg or some single leg sort of training. And I do always keep a foundation of single leg training because the nature of a surfer is they're going to have a crazy competition schedule. So if they're over in Hawaii, they may not have the access to a gym over there on the North Shore. So if I haven't had a common theme of single leg squatting throughout the program and the first time they do it is as they go on to the first competition of the year, I haven't really set them up for success. So that's sort of something else that influences my program, not just how much force they can produce, but is my program able to be functional across the year, across the training schedule?
I love that you've brought that up because I've had a lot of chats with some old guys at the HPC, like Oliver Farley and Jeremy Shepherd, and they were very clever in the way they would work and create the programs for the athletes that are traveling a lot because, as you said, it's not practical just to give them a program where they're lifting heavy in a gym every day. It's like you don't have access to a barbell and big weights every day when you're on a boat in Indonesia. And so are there any strategies that the average weekend warrior can sort of implement as well? Because even though we're not maybe traveling to Hawaii to compete at pipe, we go on holidays, we do all these things. Training isn't always just textbook in the same gym at home. And on the back of that sort of question, I've had some discussions around BFR training, and I don't know if you've ever implemented that with surfers, but that can be sort of a strategy when you're away to use less weight, less whatever. But yeah, any thoughts around that sort of travel training?
Yeah, so you've got to work with what you got. So if we've been focusing on squats, front squats in the gym, the next exercise we're going to go to for someone that's, your everyday surfer is, just doing some bodyweight squats. You're taking a suitcase with you, pick that thing up and squat with it. If you can travel with resistance bands, mini bands, things like that, it's really going to help. A strategy we've been trying to implement is you can buy a water bag, you can fold that up, you can put it in your suitcase. You get to the hotel, you fill that thing up, and that could be anywhere from 5 to 40 kilos. So you've got some work, you've got some resistance there you can work with. It comes to the upper body, go into your classics like push-ups, finding somewhere to do a pull-up, traveling with a TRX that you can put in the door frame. Just working with what you got. The everyday surfer, they're probably only going to be going on 4 weeks leave a year. So just getting something going is going to be really important. And then making sure that they're including some sort of, mobility into that travel program because, you go away for that 4 weeks on a surf trip, your surf load spikes through the roof. You want to make sure that you're prepared to perform every day at your best. So I think that's really important. When it comes to the BFR, this is something we use quite a lot in our rehab space. Coming back from an injury, we want to get the hypertrophy back. We can't load them up. So, BFR is really important. We've got a number of athletes that use it on the road. And it's just ensuring that we've sort of educated them around, using it safely, what pressure they should be using and things like that.
Yeah, it's cool you mentioned that. One of my best mates, Charlie Davids, did his whole PhD in BFR, and he's going to be on the podcast very soon. So I'm hoping we can get some more exact numbers around that for people who have access to BFR bands. And we were just chatting the other day about that actually. And you can even do it just with like making your own BFR. It's a lot less scientific and accurate, for obvious reasons. But yeah, you can make the most of what you just said. Make the most of what you have. Something's better than nothing, right?
Yeah, I certainly where I started, like when I started playing with it, I was getting the mini bands, doubling them up, putting them on the leg. But you quickly realise you want to come back to best practice. And, a $200 investment for the BFR cast to ensure you or your athletes are training safely, really important. Training safely means we can do things more regularly, more effective, and $200 investment for being able to train for 6 months on the road, utilising that. It's a pretty cheap investment if we think of how much it is for a weekly gym membership.
Absolutely. But yeah, a little service announcement: don't go out there and start wrapping your arms and legs in
Definitely not.
tourniquets. Let's wait until Charlie's episode comes out and we can get some scientific rigor behind that statement.
100%.
But let's just stay on this on the strength component for one last little question here. You've nailed all the stuff for upper and lower body. What about the core? Am I getting anything from just doing my 50 sit-ups in the morning every morning, or are there better ways to train the core for surfing? What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Well, again, like the upper body and the lower body, we want to train every sort of pattern. So, we want to be, flex, extend, lateral flex. We want to be able to resist our motions, both, flexion, extension, lateral flexion. We want to be able to resist those motions. So, for a young athlete, we might be starting with things like bridging, planking. We are still going to keep in the classics like sit-ups, lateral flexion, rotational wood chops and things like that. Because the nature is with surfing, you're in this sort of extended position. If you've got really good mobility, it's coming from the thoracic. But your everyday surfer's probably not going to have that, or they're going to get tired quite quick. So it's going to be coming from the lower back, from the neck. So we want to make sure that these athletes that are probably getting quite a lot of lower back sort of load, that they can move in each sort of pattern. They can flex, they can extend, they can lateral flex, they can rotate. For me, working all these planes, having good strength from all these planes, both, through sort of an isotonic movement or being able to hold it in a static position, this sort of comes to being a really well-rounded, robust person.
Yeah. There's a couple of very interesting things and discussions I've heard around training core. One of them comes back to this whole balance training thing, and you see people that have a barbell on their back, they're trying to squat 60 kilos on a Bosu ball, and you just see a lot of shit like that in board sports in general. You see it in skating and snowboarding, particularly in surfing, and the claims they're making are around it's training the core and stability, and there's a lot of direct correlations people make between if you're training stability, you're training the core. If you're training one, you're training the other. Is there any merit to doing balance training for that purpose?
For me, there's not. Like, for me, I think about, if I bring it back to sport, how do we produce force? Like, we're producing force on a solid object like surfing. The faster the board's going, the more stability the board has. So when I think of balance training, standing on something unstable, it doesn't really have a place in the programs I design. It's a bit of fun. Like if you're going to get some adherence to a program and the athlete wants to do a couple of single leg balances on a beam or something like that, maybe you've got to throw it in. But if it comes to core training, I'm going to isolate it and then I'm going to integrate it into other movements.
Yeah, simple as that. Well, by not having a stable surface, you're automatically reducing the amount of force you can produce, and so that's why, I don't like to just judge by seeing something pop up on social media and going, oh, they have no idea what they're doing, because there is some sort of merit into maybe it's injury, coming back from an injury, you're doing some sort of progression where it's unstable surface. But for people who are trying to improve strength, that is just a definite no. You're not going to improve. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're sitting on the performance side, balance training is probably not going to make it in there. If we're in the rehabilitation place and that we need some proprioception, there's going to be that's got its time and its place. But the nature of a surfer, they stand on a surfboard and they're skimming along the wave. They're the masters of balance. They're getting it from their sport every day. How much more do they need to train it? And if we're thinking of professional surfers, they make their livelihood from surfing, putting them on a Bosu ball with a barbell on their back, super dangerous. You wouldn't treat any other, asset like that, would you? You wouldn't endanger another asset. So you want to ensure you're getting your bang for buck with your training, and you're never doing any harm through the training process, because ultimately you want them to be able to perform on the water and never take anything away from that.
Yeah. Geez, you wouldn't want to see that as a sponsor, would you? I'm just thinking, give Flow Nutrition a few years and we'll have some big names under our belt. And if I saw one of my athletes doing that, you'd start getting nervous, wouldn't you?
100%, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. The C part in S&C, right? We've got the conditioning, which no one wants to hear, but it's a fact. We need it when we're surfing. We expend so much energy out in the water. There's some really good research, particularly from Ollie Farley, that's looked at what we're doing in the water. If we're surfing 2 to 3 days a week, let's say, is that going to be enough conditioning for us, or should we be going for runs, jumping in the pool, doing swimming programs? What are your sort of thoughts around that conditioning side of surfing?
I think it's really important. Like if we look at surfing, we might have one high intensity effort, catch a wave, you paddle back out. If you're just an everyday surfer, you might still be sitting there for another 20 minutes. So your heart rate's going to be sitting quite low. So you overall work in a 30-minute surf, an hour surf, you're not getting a lot done. If you're on a beach break, maybe if you're on the point and you're consistently paddling, you're getting a little bit more work. For me, even if you are doing that work, I want to build a larger capacity. So you've got more opportunities to be successful when you actually get on the board. You're ready to go rather than you're just tired from paddling for the last 20, 30 minutes. So I'll come back to some of my principles. So, I want to build aerobic capacity first of all. So I want to spend some time on a modality you feel comfortable with. For surfers, I don't lend myself to running too often,
I've seen some surfers run before, and there's a pretty good reason.
Exactly. Anytime you see a run around, you sort of realise why they're not runners.
Yeah.
But I lend myself to off-feet conditioning. So I'm going to utilise an objective test like a ramp test or a max aerobic power test, time trial, something like that, so I can get some sort of figures on either the heart rate zones they're going to be working at or what sort of watts I could expect on a watt bike or a rower and things like that. Build out an aerobic base, go to some more aerobic power, and then, finish off with some high-intensity intervals. That's sort of how, if in a perfect world, I would progress my conditioning plan. But again, the nature of surfing is for the elite level, I might get them for a 4-week block, So building that aerobic capacity, we might not have enough time. So we might lend ourselves to high-intensity intervals to, develop that base, get a conditioning stimulus, and hopefully have an impact on their ability to be able to compete better, have a bigger base.
What you've just said there is amazing. What sort of actual modes of exercise are we talking about there when you talk about all of those sessions? Are we on a watt bike? Like, what are the actual exercises they're doing then if it's not running?
So for me, I love the watt bike. We've got a ski erg, we've got a rower, we might do boxing. We try and be as objective as possible, having some numbers around that. So, what watts they're hitting on the watt bike, what distance we want them to cover on the rower or the ski erg, what heart rate zone we want them to be at when boxing. You want people to enjoy the training process. The nature of surfers is they don't need to engage in our program. So we want we want to help them as much as possible. We want to be objective, but we want to enjoy the training process. So we might mix modality. So we might do 5 minutes on the watt bike with some varied intervals. We might throw them on the rower, varied intervals, get them boxing, make it a really enjoyable process while still achieving the goal that we set, which might be an aerobic base. It might be, more aerobic power. Whatever that goal is or that priority for the session, we try and make the training process as enjoyable as possible.
Yeah, that is so important. And for any young exercise science graduates out there, I don't think they put enough emphasis on that at uni. Like, you could make the best program in the world, but if they have no interest in it or if they're not going to do it, there's no point, right? And so I think that's where you learn as a coach to actually understand your athlete, your client, your whatever, and what are they going to enjoy. And that, in my eyes, should be the number one thing, right?
Absolutely. I remember back when I interned with Paddle Australia. So sort of in my first 2 weeks, I got the opportunity to write a program for one of the sort of elite paddlers. And I'm like looking at all the research. I'm like, this is the best program for a sprint kayaker. I showed him the program. He's like, nah, hate it. I don't do chin-ups. It flares my neck up. I don't do this exercise. It flares my back up. Yeah. Tore it to shreds. I looked at his old program. He's like, yeah, I like that one. We'll add those exercises. So I learned pretty quickly on in that internship, like, speak to the athlete. What do they enjoy doing? Because if they enjoy, doing pull-ups or they enjoy lat pull-down instead, they're going to be more bought into that process. It's going to be easier to progressively overload it. It's going to be easier to, build that adherence to what we're trying to do.
Especially with surfers, because if it's pumping at Kira for a week, you have to have a pretty convincing story as to why they have to come in and do a strength session.
100%. It's
They're pretty stubborn, those bloody surfers.
Absolutely. And it's taken a while to build that buy-in. But we now regularly have athletes turning up to the gym at 5:30, 6 in the morning, to get their session in, obviously at a reduced volume, but get it in and then, go and enjoy yourself. Go out and Kira, get barreled.
Love that. The last thing we'll touch on here is around, and it's a bit of a personal question because I hate stretching. Like I love, my body's a temple. I love going to the gym. I love doing exercise, but stretching is just so unappealing to me. I know how important mobility is for surfing, mobility and flexibility. Is just simply doing 5 to 10 minutes of just static stretching a day going to be doing any good? What would you suggest for like the weekend warrior that wants to feel better and not perform at the elite level, but just improve their surfing a little bit? What sort of mobility stuff would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I think, not everyone's going to have the time to do a dedicated 30, 40-minute mobility session. So it's sort of looking at what you do across the week and where you can put that in. So if you're going for 3 surfs a week, what are you doing before you surf? Are you adding in some mobility so that you feel better for the surf that you're about to go on?
The proactive approach.
Proactive approach.
Right.
If you're sitting there each night, you watch 2 hours of TV. Do you get down and do a couple of stretches on some of our key areas? So like in surfing, we want good ankle range, we want good hip range, we want good thoracic range. If we can improve that, you're going to see a noticeable change pretty quickly. So if you can extend through your thoracic really well, you can get into a better paddling position. So I think, first of all, finding time when you can build that into your week and things you're already doing. And then what do you do within your gym session? So, if you're going to the gym and you're doing some pull-ups, what are you doing in your rest period? Are you sitting there looking at your phone? Or could we be doing some thoracic mobility to, build that out as well? So maybe it's not the 45 minutes of stretching or the 10 minutes, but it's building it into your actual week and the time you're already utilizing to sort of better yourself.
For those out there that do enjoy that sort of thing, is one better than the other? Would you prefer doing a big block of 45 minutes twice or 3 times a week compared with little bits here and there?
It depends. Like if I wanted to make a big change in someone's mobility, I need to dedicate time to it. If I want to maintain something and make slight improvements, little increments across the week are probably going to be better.
Yeah, amazing. Look, mate, that's 20 minutes. There was so much we covered in there. But yeah, mate, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Once again, thank you very much for your time and sharing your knowledge here. If anyone does have any further questions, don't hesitate to send us a message at Flow Nutrition, or you can hit Cohen up on Instagram directly at coach_Cohen Crispin.
Yep,
that's the one.
That's it.
Beautiful. And yeah, he'll, I'm sure, answer any questions that you have as well. Always down for a chat. And he also has some really cool content on there as well. And do you have some programs I've seen on your little link tree?
Yeah, I've got a couple of programs on there.
Yeah.
Bit of S&C, private sort of stuff.
Yeah, cool. And is that for like recreational surfers, competitive surfers?
Only for sort of that recreational, yeah.
Yeah,
we only
cool.
sort of do the competitive stuff within the context of Surfing Australia.
Yeah, sweet, righto. Yeah, so make sure you jump on there, check it out, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week to answer more of your questions. Thanks. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Flow Performance Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the chat and found loads of value that you can use to fuel more flow state in your life. If you did enjoy the content and want to support the podcast, don't forget to give it a 5-star rating, leave a review, or even better, share it to a mate, post it up on your Instagram story and tag Flow Performance Podcast. We really do appreciate any support in getting this content out into the world. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will catch you again next week.